Giant Apache girl saved a dying stranger. Next day, 500 soldiers arrived. The sun had barely begun to rise over the wide, sandy plains when Ayana, the young Apache girl, stepped out of her small hut. She was unlike other children in her village. Even at 12, she was tall and strong, her presence commanding yet calm. Her long, dark hair swayed gently in the morning breeze as she moved through the desert's edge, her eyes sharp and alert. Every step she took left small prints in the soft earth, and she paused occasionally to observe the tracks of animals nearby, rabbits, foxes, and coyotes. Living close to nature had taught her to notice everything, the way the wind shifted, how the birds cried, and how even the smallest sounds could signal danger. That morning, Ayana's heart felt restless. She had a strange feeling, one that made her uneasy yet curious. She wandered further than usual, past the small clusters of sagebrush and rocky hills, until she reached an area she had never explored before. The desert seemed quiet, almost too quiet, and the only sound was the faint rustle of leaves and the distant call of a hawk. As she walked, she noticed something unusual, a figure lying motionless near the dried-up riverbed. At first, she thought it might be an animal, injured or dead. But as she drew closer, her sharp eyes saw the outline of a human body. The man was sprawled on the ground, his clothes torn and dusty, and his face pale and covered in dried blood. He did not move, and his chest barely rose and fell with each shallow breath. Ayana's heart beat faster. She had heard stories from the elders about travelers getting lost or hurt in the desert, but she had never seen anyone in such a state. Fear crept into her mind, but it was quickly replaced by determination. She could not leave him there. She knew that if she did, he would not survive. Carefully, Ayana approached the stranger, keeping her distance at first. She studied him, trying to understand what had happened. His clothes suggested he was not from her village, and there were marks on his arms and legs that looked like he had fallen or been attacked. Despite the danger of being near a stranger, Ayana felt a deep compassion stirring in her chest. She remembered her mother's teachings about helping those in need, about the importance of courage and kindness. This was a moment that called for both. Slowly, she knelt beside him and touched his shoulder lightly. "Are you alive?" she whispered, not expecting an answer. The man groaned softly, a sound that made Ayana's heart ache. She could see his lips move slightly, trying to speak, but no words came out. The situation was urgent. She had to act fast. Ayana's mind raced as she tried to decide what to do. She remembered a small gourd she carried on her belt filled with water and a satchel with herbs her mother had taught her to use for healing. She gently poured water over the man's lips, helping him drink a little, careful not to overwhelm him. Then she reached into her satchel and took out a bundle of herbs, some to clean wounds, some to soothe pain. Using the knowledge she had gained from years of helping her mother, she began to tend to his injuries. Her hands were steady, but her heart was pounding. She cleaned the dirt and dried blood from his face and arms, whispering soft encouragements even though he could not understand her words. She applied the crushed leaves to his cuts and wrapped them with strips of cloth she had torn from her own garment. She worked methodically, every movement careful and deliberate. Though she was young, she knew the desert could be unforgiving, and she could not afford a single mistake. As she worked, she noticed the man's breathing was uneven, shallow, and labored. Fear returned, clawing at her mind. What if she was too late? What if her efforts were not enough? But Ayana did not give in to despair. Instead, she focused on what she could do. Keep him alive until help arrived, no matter how long it took. She shaded him from the rising sun using a large piece of cloth and gathered small stones around to create a windbreak. Her knowledge of the land, passed down by the elders, allowed her to find shelter even in this open, harsh desert. Hours passed, and the sun climbed higher in the sky. Ayana never left the man's side. She fed him small sips of water and encouraged him to stay awake. At times he would moan or twitch, and she would adjust the herbs or apply gentle pressure to stop bleeding. Her muscles ached, but she did not complain. Every second counted, and she knew that the desert would not wait for anyone. The man's survival depended on her courage, her skill, and her unwavering attention. Occasionally, her mind wandered to thoughts of the village. What would her parents think? What if they discovered she had been away for so long? But she pushed these worries aside. Right now, this stranger needed her. She remembered her father's words. Strength is not only in the body, Ayana. True strength is in the heart. That strength was alive inside her at this moment, guiding her hands and her mind. As the day wore on, shadows began to lengthen, and the temperature dropped slightly. Ayana gathered more herbs to prepare for the night, knowing that the cold desert could be just as deadly as the heat. She arranged the area to be safe from animals, placing rocks and thorny branches in a circle around them. She started a small fire, careful to control the flames so they would not spread. The smoke would keep some predators away, and the warmth would help the man's weak body stay alive. The man remained unconscious most of the afternoon, but every now and then he would murmur or twitch. Ayana kept talking to him softly, telling him stories of the desert, of the animals and plants, of the village far away. She did not know if he could understand, but she believed her words carried energy and comfort. Her voice was calm and steady, filled with determination and hope. As the sun dipped closer to the horizon, Ayana began to feel the weight of exhaustion. Her arms ached, her legs were stiff, and her stomach growled from hunger. But she did not allow herself to stop. She reminded herself that survival often required sacrifice. Her body was tired, but her spirit was strong. Every herb she applied, every drop of water she gave, every gentle movement she made was a step closer to saving him. Night fell, and the desert became colder and quieter. Stars sparkled above, and the moon cast a silver glow on the sand. Ayana stayed awake beside the stranger, listening for any signs of danger. Every sound made her alert, but she did not let fear control her. She whispered encouragements to him, telling him to hold on, to fight, to live. She imagined his family, wondering if they knew where he was. She hoped her actions would reunite him with those who cared for him. Somewhere deep inside, Ayana felt a bond forming between her and the stranger, even though they had not spoken a word. She felt responsibility, connection, and a deep, unexplainable sense of purpose. In her heart, she knew that helping him was not just a duty, it was her calling. She had faced challenges before, but nothing had tested her like this. Every second was precious, and she guarded that life as if it were her own. Hours passed slowly. The desert night was long, and Ayana fought fatigue with determination. Her hands were raw from tending the wounds, but she did not stop. She monitored his breathing, checked his pulse, and adjusted his position to keep him comfortable. She whispered to him about the village, about her family, and about the world beyond the desert. She believed that her words, filled with hope and life, would help guide him back from the edge. Finally, as the first hints of dawn touched the horizon, a small movement caught her eye. The stranger stirred. He opened his eyes slowly, blinking against the soft light of morning. Relief flooded Ayana's heart. She had done it. He was alive. Though weak, he was alive. Ayana smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face, feeling a mix of exhaustion and triumph. For the first time, she allowed herself a moment of rest, leaning back against a rock and looking at the man she had saved. He looked fragile, but there was a spark of life in his eyes. Ayana knew this was only the beginning. The man would need more help, but she had given him the chance to survive. And that, she thought, was worth every hardship, every sleepless night, and every aching muscle. The morning sun stretched across the desert, warming the sand and casting long shadows from the rocky hills. Ayana sat beside the stranger she had saved, carefully observing him. His eyes fluttered open, and for a moment he looked confused, unsure of where he was or what had happened. His breathing was still weak, and he tried to move, but his arms trembled, and a sharp wince crossed his face. Ayana quickly placed her hands on his shoulders to steady him. "Shh, slow," she whispered softly, her voice calm and soothing. She pointed to the water gourd and then to his mouth, showing him he could drink a little. The stranger obeyed, swallowing carefully, and Ayana's heart lifted slightly. Every small victory mattered. She realized that he was too weak to walk, so she had to think quickly. She remembered a hidden hollow near the riverbed, a small area with shade from a few twisted trees and soft soil. If she could move him there, he would be safer and more comfortable, but carrying him alone would be difficult. He was a grown man, and even though she was tall and strong for her age, the task was daunting. Ayana took a deep breath, set her jaw, and lifted him with steady determination. Her arms strained under the weight, and her legs shook, but she did not give up. Step by step, she carried him across the uneven terrain, careful not to jostle his injuries. Each movement required careful calculation, a combination of strength, balance, and patience. When she finally reached the hollow, she gently laid him down on a bed of soft grass and leaves she had gathered. The stranger groaned softly, and Ayana brushed the sand from his hair. She searched her satchel and found more herbs, some to clean his wounds, some to reduce swelling. Her hands worked quickly, yet carefully, as she applied the poultices and wrapped them with cloth strips. Every motion was deliberate, her concentration absolute. She murmured to him all the while, not for him to understand her words, but to keep the energy of life around him. As the hours passed, Ayana noticed how quiet the desert had become. The wind had softened, and the animals that normally moved around the area seemed absent. She realized that the solitude of the desert could be both a blessing and a threat. The lack of predators meant he was safe for now, but if something went wrong, help was nowhere nearby. She could only rely on herself, her knowledge, and her courage. The stranger's eyes would open occasionally, only for a brief moment, revealing confusion and fear. Ayana continued to reassure him with gestures and soft words. She touched his hand lightly, encouraging him to hold on, and patted his shoulder to show presence and care. Despite his inability to speak clearly, she could see gratitude in his eyes. That small spark of acknowledgement strengthened her resolve. By midday, the sun grew hotter and the heat pressed down upon the desert. Ayana worried about dehydration and exhaustion. She made small sips of water available for him, guiding his hands to the gourd when he needed it. She also shaded him with a piece of cloth, tying it between two small trees she had noticed in the hollow. The improvised shade offered a slight relief from the relentless sun. Ayana herself stayed under the shade as much as possible, conserving energy for the tasks that still required her attention. While caring for the stranger, Ayana reflected on the dangers they both faced. If anyone from outside the village stumbled upon them, it could bring trouble, as strangers were often met with suspicion or fear. Yet, she could not abandon him. Her instincts and the teachings of her parents guided her actions. She had learned that life, even of someone unknown, was precious, and helping those in need was an honor and a duty. As afternoon approached, Ayana began to gather small sticks and dry leaves to prepare a fire. The fire would serve multiple purposes: warmth during the cold desert night, a signal if someone searched for the stranger, and protection from animals. She was careful not to make it too large, knowing that an uncontrolled fire could be dangerous. Once the fire was set, she adjusted its size so it provided light and warmth but remained manageable. While waiting for the fire to stabilize, Ayana continued to clean the man's wounds. Some cuts were deeper than she had first thought, and she needed to reapply the herbs and bandages. She worked with precision, knowing that one mistake could cause infection or pain. Her hands moved with a rhythm she had developed through years of helping her mother with small injuries and illnesses in the village. Her determination never wavered. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, the desert's shadows lengthened. The temperature began to drop, and the air carried a chill that made Ayana wrap herself in a piece of cloth. She could feel the stranger shivering slightly and quickly covered him with another layer of cloth. She whispered to him softly, telling him stories of the desert at night, of the animals that emerged and the stars that shone. She spoke gently, even though she knew he might not understand, because she believed that the sound of life and care could help him hold on. Hours passed slowly, and the night deepened. The desert became silent, save for the occasional distant howl of a coyote. Ayana stayed awake, her eyes scanning the dark horizon for any signs of danger. She was aware that exhaustion could overcome her, but she refused to let herself falter. Every second mattered. Her mind alternated between worry and hope, between fear and courage. She could not sleep until she knew he would survive. The stranger's breathing became more even as he rested, but he was still weak. Ayana continued to monitor him, adjusting his position to keep him comfortable, brushing dust from his hair and murmuring words of encouragement. her energy drained, yet her spirit remained unwavering. She knew the night was long, but her determination to save him gave her strength she did not know she possessed. At one point, the man's eyes fluttered open slightly, and he let out a faint groan. Ayana leaned closer, holding his hand and speaking softly. She repeated the same words and gestures she had been using all day, trying to comfort him, to give him hope. She noticed a slight movement of his fingers in response and smiled quietly. That small sign of life filled her with renewed determination. The night deepened further, and the stars illuminated the desert in a gentle glow. Ayana felt a strange mix of fatigue and pride. She had never imagined herself capable of such endurance, of keeping someone alive in such harsh conditions. Yet she understood that courage was not the absence of fear. It was action in spite of fear. She had faced her fears, and through that, she had given this man a chance to live. Hours dragged on, and Ayana's thoughts wandered to the future. She wondered if he had family, if anyone knew he was missing. She hoped that someone would come looking for him, but she also knew that survival depended on what she did now. Her responsibility was absolute. She whispered to him, telling him to stay awake, to fight, to hold on for another day.
As the first hints of dawn began to touch the horizon, the stranger stirred more noticeably.
His breathing strengthened slightly, and he opened his eyes fully. Relief and joy surged through Ayana. She had kept him alive through the night. Though he was still weak, he had survived, and that survival was a testament to her courage, determination, and care. She helped him sit up slowly, supporting his weight and guiding him to drink more water. The man tried to speak, and though his words were weak and broken, Ayana understood enough to know he was thankful. She smiled softly, feeling a deep satisfaction that went beyond pride. She had done more than save a life. She had given someone hope, a chance to continue living, and that, she realized, was a gift greater than anything else. The morning sun had fully risen, casting golden light across the desert, and Ayana sat beside the stranger she had saved. He was still weak, but his eyes held a spark of life now, and that gave her hope. She helped him sit up slowly, supporting his arms and shoulders. Each movement was careful and deliberate. She did not want to strain his injuries. The man's breathing was still uneven, but he was more alert than the night before. Ayana noticed how ragged his clothing was, torn in several places, and how dirt and dried blood stained his face and hands. She took out cloth from her satchel and carefully cleaned him, brushing away dust and smoothing out what she could. It was slow work, but necessary. She talked to him gently the whole time, pointing to herself, the desert, and the small items she had gathered for him. Though their languages were different, the gestures and soft tones seemed to comfort him. Once he was somewhat cleaned and more comfortable, Ayana realized he needed to move to a safer place. The hollow where she had stayed the night offered some protection, but it was small and exposed. She remembered a more sheltered area near a small grove of desert trees where animals rarely ventured, and where there was enough shade to protect him from the midday sun. The challenge was that it was a longer journey, and he was too weak to walk alone. Ayana took a deep breath and prepared herself. She had carried him before, but the journey would be longer this time. She gently helped him to stand, supporting his arms over her shoulders. At first, he swayed and almost collapsed, but with her steady guidance, he managed to take small steps. She encouraged him with soft words and gestures, showing him where to place his feet, and slowly they began moving toward the grove. The desert was hot, and the air shimmered with heat waves. Ayana felt the sweat on her brow, and her arms ached from carrying him, but she refused to stop. Every step counted, and every moment mattered. She knew the desert could be unforgiving, and she could not risk letting him fall or stumble. She reminded herself to focus on each step, each movement, and each breath. Along the way, the man tried to speak. His voice was weak, almost a whisper, but Ayana listened carefully. Though she could not understand all his words, she caught fragments. Something about soldiers, something about being left behind, and something about danger. She realized he was part of a group, and he had been injured while traveling through the desert. Her heart sank at the thought of what might have happened to the others. Yet for now, she concentrated on helping him survive. By the time they reached the grove, the man was exhausted. Ayana gently lowered him onto soft sand and leaves, arranging a comfortable spot beneath the shade. She shaded him further with cloth and small branches, creating a small canopy to protect him from the sun. She gathered fresh water from a nearby stream she had noticed earlier and offered it to him carefully, letting him sip slowly. Every drop counted, and she made sure he did not choke or become overwhelmed. Once he had rested and drank water, Ayana attended to his injuries again. She reapplied herbs to wounds that were deep and potentially infected, wrapped them carefully with clean cloth, and pressed lightly to stop bleeding. Her hands were steady, but her mind never rested. She monitored his breathing, watched for signs of shock, and whispered words of encouragement. Though she could not speak his language fluently, her tone conveyed care, determination, and hope. As the day progressed, the man began to show more signs of recovery. He moved his fingers, blinked more often, and even attempted a weak smile. Ayana felt a surge of relief. Her efforts were working. She continued to nurture him, offering small amounts of food she had prepared from dried fruits and nuts, broken into tiny pieces so he could swallow easily. Each bite he took was a victory, and she celebrated quietly in her heart. By mid-afternoon, Ayana realized that he needed more than care. He needed to communicate what had happened, at least partially, so she could understand his situation better. She sat beside him, pointing to herself and then to him, repeating gestures that implied questions: where he was from, what had happened to his companions, and if he knew anyone nearby who might help. The man tried to respond, using broken words and pointing toward the distant horizon. Ayana pieced together that he had been part of a military unit, ambushed in the desert and left behind while the rest went on. Hearing this, Ayana's heart raced. She had never faced anything like this before, but she did not panic. Instead, she focused on helping him fully recover enough to move. She encouraged him to rest, reminding him to stay calm, to breathe slowly, and to conserve energy. She shaded him from the harsh sun and ensured he drank enough water. She also kept watch on the surroundings, alert for any danger, wild animals, strangers, or sudden weather changes. As evening approached, the desert grew cooler, and Ayana decided they needed a fire again. This time, she made it slightly larger, careful to keep it controlled. The fire offered warmth for the coming night, light to keep predators away, and a sense of security for both of them. She arranged small stones around it to prevent it from spreading, and ensured it burned steadily without smoke that might alert unwanted attention. The stranger rested near the fire, still too weak to move much but now fully conscious. Ayana sat beside him, sharing quiet moments of comfort. She gestured to the stars, pointing to constellations she had learned from her elders. She told him stories of the desert, the animals that roamed it at night, and the wisdom of her people. She believed that even if he could not understand all her words, her tone and presence would give him strength and hope. Hours passed, and the desert night became still. The man's breathing was more even, and he occasionally tried to speak to her. She listened patiently, responding with gestures, soft nods, and encouraging words. She gave him small sips of water and adjusted the bandages on his wounds. Her energy was draining, but she refused to sleep until she knew he would be safe. During the night, she thought about the people who might be searching for him. She imagined his companions worried about his fate. She hoped her actions would buy enough time for him to be found, but she also understood that survival depended on what she did now. She whispered encouragements to him repeatedly, telling him to hold on, to fight, to live. Her voice was steady, filled with courage and care, and she felt a connection growing between them, even without words. As dawn approached, the man stirred more significantly. His eyes opened fully, and he tried to sit up. Ayana helped him, supporting his weak body and guiding him to drink more water. He managed a few words, broken and weak, but she could understand enough to know he was grateful. That small spark of acknowledgement filled her with pride and relief. She had kept him alive through the night and helped him regain enough strength to continue. With renewed determination, Ayana began to prepare for what would come next. She knew he could not remain in the grove forever, and eventually they would need to reach others who could help him fully. But for now, the focus was on strengthening him, building his energy and maintaining his hope. Every small task mattered: tending his wounds, keeping him hydrated, feeding him carefully, and ensuring he remained safe. By mid-morning, the man was able to sit up more steadily and even take a few small steps with Ayana supporting him. He looked around, taking in the desert and the grove, and his eyes reflected a mix of wonder, relief, and gratitude. Ayana smiled softly, encouraging him to keep moving slowly. She knew that each small step he took was a victory, proof that her efforts had made a difference.
As the sun climbed higher, they spent the day preparing for the journey to a safer area.
Ayana helped him gather strength by encouraging rest, hydration, and small movements. She continued to talk softly, using gestures to explain what they would do next. The stranger responded with small nods, weak smiles, and attempts at words, showing he was beginning to trust her completely. By the evening, the man had regained enough strength to sit and move with some independence. He could now communicate a little more clearly using gestures and broken words. Ayana felt a sense of accomplishment and pride. She had not only saved his life, but had also built a connection of trust and care. The night ahead would require vigilance, but she knew they were ready to face it together. The sun rose slowly over the village, casting golden light over the adobe huts and the dusty paths that ran between them. Inside her small home, Ayana stirred quietly, careful not to wake her parents just yet. She had spent the previous days caring for the injured stranger, and though she had grown tired, she knew her duty was far from over. Today, she planned to keep him safe while also finding a way to communicate with the villagers who might be worried by now. Ayana led the man carefully through the outskirts of the village, keeping him close to the shade of rocks and shrubs. His legs were still weak, but he was improving each day. She helped him walk slowly, supporting him with a gentle hand on his back. Though the villagers had not yet seen him, she hoped they would understand that he was not a threat, but someone in need of care. As they moved closer to the village, Ayana noticed people beginning to gather in small groups, watching curiously from a distance. Mothers held their children close, and men whispered quietly among themselves. It was unusual for anyone to wander so far from the village, and seeing a stranger walking with a young girl was extraordinary. Ayana remained calm, gesturing for the man to stay close, and explaining, through gestures and broken words, that they only wanted help, not trouble. The villagers' suspicion was palpable. Some shouted warnings, and others came closer to see what was happening. Ayana raised her hands slowly, trying to convey peace. She pointed to the man, then to herself, and made motions that suggested care and healing. Slowly, curiosity overcame fear. A few villagers approached cautiously, observing the stranger's weak but conscious state. An elder woman known for her wisdom and fairness stepped forward. Her eyes widened as she saw the man's injuries. She recognized the signs of someone who had been in serious danger and immediately understood that this was no ordinary encounter. The elder approached Ayana gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Did you do this?" she asked softly, her voice filled with awe. Ayana nodded, keeping her attention on the man, ensuring he remained steady. Word spread quickly throughout the village. People who had initially been fearful now approached with caution, but also with admiration. They saw a young girl who had not only ventured far from the village, but had also cared for a severely injured stranger, keeping him alive through the harsh desert conditions. Murmurs of amazement filled the air. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others whispered blessings, and many simply stared, trying to understand the courage that had driven her actions. The man, still weak but now more coherent, began to speak slowly, pointing to the villagers and then to Ayana. Though his words were broken, his gestures conveyed gratitude and recognition. He tried to explain what had happened to him, that he had been part of a group ambushed in the desert and left behind. The villagers listened intently, piecing together the story from his words and Ayana's gestures. As the day went on, more villagers gathered, bringing food, clean water, and blankets. They helped tend to his wounds under Ayana's guidance, following her instructions carefully. Even the men, initially skeptical of her abilities, began to show respect. They realized that her knowledge, courage, and determination had saved a life that might otherwise have been lost. The sight of a single girl standing strong and confident beside the injured stranger inspired everyone who witnessed it. By afternoon, the villagers were openly praising Ayana.
Some offered gifts of handmade blankets and dried fruits, while others simply bowed their heads in admiration. They called her the giant Apache girl, a name that reflected both her physical presence and her remarkable strength of character. Though she was young, her actions had bridged the gap between the villagers and the stranger, showing that courage and kindness could create trust where there had been fear. Meanwhile, the stranger's condition continued to improve under Ayana's care.
His breathing became steady, his color returned, and he was able to sit and even stand with minimal support. He looked around at the village, the people, and at Ayana, and he understood fully the depth of her bravery.
Though he could not yet walk long distances, he was able to communicate through gestures and broken words, thanking both Ayana and the villagers for their care and hospitality. As evening approached, a sense of calm settled over the village. The initial tension and fear had faded, replaced by admiration and respect for the young girl who had done the impossible. Ayana, tired but proud, looked at the man she had saved. She felt a deep satisfaction, knowing that her efforts had not only kept him alive, but had also inspired her community. She realized that bravery was not measured by size or age, but by the willingness to act with courage, compassion, and determination when it mattered most. The elder woman approached Ayana again, placing a hand on her shoulder and speaking softly.
"You have done something remarkable," she said. "You have shown strength and wisdom far beyond your years. Your actions will be remembered, not just by this village, but by those who hear of your courage." Ayana nodded humbly, feeling both proud and a little shy. She had not acted for recognition, she had acted because it was the right thing to do. Yet hearing the praise filled her heart with quiet joy. That night, as the stars appeared in the sky, the villagers gathered near the small fire to hear the stranger's story more fully. He recounted, as best he could, the events that had led to him being injured and left behind. Ayana translated and interpreted his gestures, helping the villagers understand the danger he had faced. Everyone listened intently, some shivering at the thought of what might have happened, others shaking their heads in disbelief at the resilience and courage required to survive. Through this shared experience, the villagers began to see Ayana in a new light. She was no longer just a girl who lived among them. She was a hero, someone who had risked herself to save another, someone whose strength, intelligence, and courage were remarkable. Her actions had created a bridge between the stranger and the villagers, fostering trust and understanding where there had been fear and suspicion. By midnight, the man was able to sit more comfortably, supported by blankets and pillows provided by the villagers. He expressed his gratitude repeatedly, using gestures and broken words, while Ayana continued to offer care and comfort. The villagers, inspired by her example, promised to help him recover fully and ensure he would be safe when he eventually rejoined his companions. Throughout the night, Ayana reflected on the events of the past days. She had faced fear, exhaustion, and uncertainty, yet she had acted with determination and courage. She had relied on her knowledge, her instincts, and her heart. The experience had taught her that bravery was not just about facing danger. It was about choosing to act when others might turn away, about giving hope when all seems lost, and about showing kindness to those who need it most. The next morning, the village woke to a new sense of respect and admiration for Ayana. Her story of courage had spread quickly, and people were inspired by her example. They recognized that her actions had not only saved a life, but had also strengthened the community, teaching lessons about compassion, bravery, and the power of one determined individual. By the time the sun reached its peak, the villagers were fully aware of the depth of Ayana's bravery. They had witnessed the transformation of a nearly dying stranger into someone who could now sit, speak, and even stand with assistance. They had seen firsthand how a young girl's courage and care could make a difference that seemed impossible. And they knew that her story would be told for generations, a tale of hope, strength, and the extraordinary heart of the giant Apache girl. The morning air in the village was calm and warm, carrying the smell of the desert sand mixed with the faint scent of herbs and wood smoke from the small fires the villagers had kept burning through the night. Ayana stood beside the stranger, now much stronger and more alert than he had been when she first found him. He could stand without her support and could speak a few words more clearly, though his voice was still weak. Ayana's heart swelled with pride. She had never imagined that her actions would have such a profound effect, not only on the stranger but also on the village that had watched her courage unfold.
Suddenly a distant sound broke the peaceful morning, the rhythmic thumping of hooves across the desert plains.
Ayana squinted against the sunlight and saw dust clouds rising in the distance. Her heart skipped a beat.
She had been wondering when help might arrive, and now it seemed that it was finally coming. She gestured for the stranger to stay calm and pointed toward the approaching figures. The villagers, sensing the commotion, gathered around, curious and anxious. As the dust cleared, it became obvious that it was a large group of mounted soldiers riding swiftly across the plains.
There were hundreds of them. 500 in total. Their uniforms bright and their movements precise. The villagers gasped in astonishment.
No one had expected such a large force to arrive so suddenly. Some whispered fears of danger, while others whispered prayers of hope. Ayana remained steady, knowing that the soldiers were coming for the man she had saved. The commander, a tall man with a stern yet kind face, rode to the front of the group. He looked carefully at the village, the people gathered near the edge, and finally at the young girl standing beside the stranger. His eyes widened in surprise and then softened with understanding as the man he had been searching for stepped forward and gestured toward Ayana. Though the man's words were weak, his meaning was clear. This girl had saved his life. The commander dismounted and approached carefully. His soldiers fanned out behind him, ensuring the area was secure but showing no aggression toward the villagers. He extended his hand toward Ayana and spoke with respect and awe. "You saved his life?" he asked. Ayana nodded, a small smile on her face, her eyes calm but filled with quiet pride. The commander turned to the man, who confirmed again with gestures and words that it was true. The villagers, who had been watching silently, now stepped closer, their curiosity mixed with admiration.
They had heard stories of brave warriors and heroes, but to witness a single young girl save a man from certain death was extraordinary.
Some of the older men shook their heads in disbelief, and the elder woman who had first recognized Ayana's courage stepped forward to place her hand on the girl's shoulder. "You are truly remarkable," she said softly, her voice filled with reverence. Ayana simply nodded, her humility intact. She had not acted for recognition, but it was clear that her bravery was being honored. The commander then addressed the villagers, explaining that the man had been part of a military unit that had been ambushed in the desert. He praised Ayana for her courage and skill, acknowledging that without her, the man would not have survived. The soldiers themselves began to gather around, some offering food and water, others standing in respectful silence, watching the young girl who had done something no adult soldier could have accomplished alone. As the morning passed, the soldiers carefully examined the man's condition. Ayana assisted them, explaining which herbs she had used, how she had tended to his wounds, and how she had kept him hydrated and safe. Her knowledge and care impressed even the most experienced soldiers. One officer who had seen countless battles and emergencies shook his head in amazement. "She has done what we could not," he said quietly.
This girl is a true hero. The villagers continued to watch in awe as the soldiers prepared to take the man back with them. The commander spoke with him quietly, confirming his health and safety, and then turned to Ayana.
He knelt to her level, his voice respectful and sincere.
"Your courage has saved a life today," he said. "You have shown strength, wisdom, and heart beyond your years. Your people must be proud of you." Ayana blushed slightly but held her head high.
She felt proud, not because of the words, but because she knew she had done the right thing. The soldiers then offered gifts to the village, as a sign of gratitude, blankets, tools, and dried provisions for the harsh desert journey ahead. The villagers accepted with humility and respect, and many glanced at Ayana, nodding and murmuring words of admiration. She felt a warmth in her chest, realizing that her actions had not only saved a life, but had also brought the village recognition and goodwill from people far beyond their home. Before leaving, the commander allowed the man to speak directly to Ayana. Though his voice was still weak, he managed to say, "Thank you."
"For my life, I will never forget."
He clasped her hand gently, and Ayana felt the weight of his gratitude. She nodded, her eyes soft, and whispered, "Stay strong. You will be well." It was a simple exchange, but it carried the weight of everything they had endured together: the fear, the struggle, and ultimately, the triumph of survival. As the soldiers prepared to depart, Ayana watched them mount their horses and ride across the desert plains. She felt a mix of emotions: relief that the man would be safe, pride in her own courage, and a quiet sadness at saying goodbye. Yet, she knew that this experience had changed her forever. She had faced fear, danger, and exhaustion, and she had emerged stronger, wiser, and braver than she had ever imagined. The villagers gathered around her, offering congratulations, food, and warm embraces. They spoke of her courage in hushed, reverent tones, sharing stories of the giant Apache girl who had saved a stranger from certain death. Children looked up at her with wide eyes, inspired by her bravery, while adults nodded with admiration, recognizing the rare and extraordinary strength she possessed. Ayana listened quietly, feeling both humility and pride. She had not acted for recognition, yet it was clear that her actions had left a lasting impression. As the day wore on, Ayana reflected on what had happened. She thought about the man she had saved, the nights she had stayed awake, tending to his wounds, and the moments of doubt she had pushed through with determination. She realized that courage was not about never feeling fear. It was about acting in spite of it. It was about choosing to do what was right, even when the odds seemed impossible. She had learned that true strength came from compassion, determination, and the willingness to face challenges head-on. By evening, the village settled into a calm routine, but the story of Ayana's bravery continued to ripple through the community. People whispered it to one another, retelling the events with admiration and wonder. They spoke of the young girl who had faced the desert alone, who had cared for a dying stranger, and who had earned the respect of soldiers and villagers alike. Her legend began to grow, not from her own desire, but because her actions had spoken louder than words ever could. Ayana sat outside her hut that night, looking up at the stars that sparkled brightly above the desert. She thought of the man, now safely returning to his companions, and of the soldiers who had witnessed her courage. She felt a quiet contentment, knowing that she had made a difference in the world, no matter how small it seemed in the vastness of the desert. Her heart was filled with hope, courage, and the knowledge that bravery came in many forms, and sometimes it came from the most unexpected places. The next morning, the village awoke to a sense of quiet pride. The story of the giant Apache girl had spread beyond their home, carried by travelers, the returning soldiers, and the man she had saved. Ayana walked among her people, helping with daily tasks, teaching the younger children about the desert and sharing her knowledge of herbs and healing. Yet everywhere she went, people looked at her with newfound respect, nodding in recognition of the courage she had shown. Years later, the story of Ayana's bravery would be told and retold. Children would listen wide-eyed, inspired by the tale of a young girl who had faced danger alone and saved a life. Adults would speak her name with admiration, remembering the lessons of courage, compassion, and determination she had taught them all. And though Ayana herself would remain humble, she would always know the truth, that even in the harshest deserts, one person's courage could light the way for many, and that kindness and bravery, when combined, could change the world.